Slavery in the United States was not merely a social and economic system. It was also a legal institution deeply entrenched in the fabric of American society. From the earliest days of colonial America, a complex and evolving set of laws and codes was developed to define and regulate the status, treatment, and rights, or lack thereof, of enslaved people. These legal frameworks, known as slave codes, varied from colony to colony and later from state to state. They played a crucial role in maintaining the institution of slavery and had profound impacts on the lives of enslaved individuals. This video will explore the legal frameworks and slave codes, examine their impact, and highlight key legal cases that significantly influenced the course of American slavery. The institution of slavery in America began to take shape in the early 17th century. One of the first documented legal distinctions between white indentured servants and African slaves was established in Virginia. In 1640, the case of John Punch, an African servant who attempted to escape his servitude, resulted in his lifelong enslavement, while his two European counterparts received extended indentures. This marked a significant step toward racialized slavery. By the late 17th century, many colonies had enacted comprehensive slave codes. These codes aimed to control the behavior and activities of enslaved people and prevent uprisings. For instance, the Virginia Slave Codes of 1705 codified the status of enslaved individuals as property and outlined severe punishments for various forms of resistance, such as running away or rebelling. Enslaved individuals were legally defined as chattel, meaning they were considered property rather than persons. This allowed slaveholders to buy, sell, and inherit slaves. Slave codes often included curfews and travel restrictions to prevent enslaved people from leaving the plantation or gathering in large groups. Many colonies enacted laws prohibiting the education of enslaved people, fearing that literacy would lead to rebellion. The codes prescribed harsh punishments, including whipping, branding, and mutilation, for enslaved individuals who disobeyed orders or attempted to escape. As slavery expanded into the Deep South, states like South Carolina and Georgia developed some of the most stringent and brutal slave codes. The South Carolina Slave Code of 1740, for instance, was comprehensive in its regulation of the lives of enslaved people. It prohibited enslaved individuals from earning money, learning to read, or assembling without a white person present. Additionally, the code allowed for extreme physical punishment for various offenses, reinforcing the dehumanizing treatment of enslaved people. While slavery was less prevalent in the northern colonies, it still existed, and legal frameworks were established to regulate it. The Massachusetts Body of Liberties of 1641 was one of the earliest legal documents in the colonies to address slavery, permitting the enslavement of individuals captured in just wars or purchased from outside the colony. However, northern colonies generally had more lenient codes compared to their southern counterparts, and the process of gradual emancipation began earlier in the North. With the establishment of the United States, the legal frameworks that regulated slavery became more standardized, but still varied by state. The Constitution itself contained provisions that indirectly supported the institution of slavery, such as the Three-Fifths Compromise and the Fugitive Slave Clause. The Fugitive Slave Acts were federal laws that provided for the capture and return of escaped enslaved people. The 1793 Act allowed slaveholders to capture and return escaped slaves, but faced resistance in northern states. The more stringent Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 required federal officials to assist in the capture of escaped slaves and imposed heavy penalties on those who aided fugitives. This law exacerbated tensions between the North and South and heightened the national debate over slavery. The legal frameworks and slave codes had a profound and pervasive impact on the lives of enslaved people. They were systematically denied basic human rights and subjected to severe physical, psychological, and emotional abuse. The laws created an environment of constant surveillance and control, stripping enslaved individuals of their autonomy and agency. One of the most devastating impacts of slavery was the constant threat of family separation. Slave codes allowed for the sale of enslaved individuals, including children, often tearing families apart. The lack of legal recognition of enslaved families meant that marriages and parent-child relationships were not protected. Enslaved individuals had no legal standing to sue for their rights or protection. Any attempt to seek justice through the courts was futile, as the legal system was designed to uphold the institution of slavery and protect the interests of slaveholders. Despite the oppressive legal frameworks, enslaved people resisted their conditions in various ways. Acts of resistance included running away, work slowdowns, and outright rebellion. The fear of rebellion led to even stricter slave codes, creating a vicious cycle of oppression and resistance. One of the most significant legal cases in the history of American slavery was Dred Scott versus Sanford. Dred Scott, an enslaved man, sued for his freedom on the grounds that he had lived in free territories. The Supreme Court's decision, delivered by Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, declared that African Americans, whether free or enslaved, were not citizens and had no right to sue in federal court. The ruling also deemed the Missouri Compromise unconstitutional, stating that Congress had no authority to prohibit slavery in the territories. This decision further polarized the nation and contributed to the outbreak of the Civil War. Although not an American case, Somerset versus Stewart was a landmark decision by the British courts that influenced American legal thought. The case involved James Somerset, an enslaved African brought to England by his master, Charles Stewart. The court ruled that slavery was unsupported by common law in England, effectively granting Somerset his freedom. This case fueled the abolitionist movement and influenced legal arguments against slavery in the United States. In this North Carolina case, John Mann was charged with assault after brutally beating an enslaved woman named Lydia. The court ruled in favor of Mann, stating that slaveholders had absolute authority over their slaves and could not be prosecuted for violence against them. This case underscored the lack of legal protection for enslaved individuals and affirmed the absolute power of slaveholders.